know, history is packed with these larger-than-life legends, people who totally change the world. But what if the stories we think we know aren't the whole picture? Behind those famous tales are some surprising, hidden truths we almost never hear about. Today, we're digging into the details that make these icons even more fascinating. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, so how well do you really know some of history's biggest names, like Napoleon, Cleopatra, or Einstein? What if I told you that the single most famous thing you know about each of them might be totally wrong? Or at the very least, just a tiny piece of a much bigger story. So here's the deal. We've got 5 icons, and we're gonna uncover 5 incredible secrets. These are the kinds of truths that they completely reframe how you see these people. All right, let's kick things off with Napoleon Bonaparte. Seriously, when you hear his name, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For almost everyone, it's that he was this tiny, angry guy with a massive ego, right? Well, that's not exactly the truth. Yeah, this whole little corporal thing is one of the most persistent myths out there. But the reality? Napoleon was about 5'7", which, believe it or not, was a totally average height for a French guy back in the 19th century. So where on earth did this whole short guy story come from? Well, it turns out it was this perfect storm of like a simple mistake and some seriously effective propaganda. For starters, the French and British used different measurement systems. Their inch was a little longer than the British inch, so when the Brits did the math, he sounded shorter. And his enemies, especially the British, they loved this. They just ran with it, drawing these ridiculous cartoons of a pint-sized general. Even his nickname, Le Petit Caporal, which was actually a term of endearment from his own soldiers, got twisted into an insult. And this really gets to the core of it, right? The propaganda was just a weapon, a way to shrink a giant of a man down to size. But on the actual battlefield, his presence was anything but small. You can read accounts from his soldiers who talk about this incredible, commanding confidence. It makes you think, maybe the problem wasn't that Napoleon was short. Maybe it was that his legend was just too tall for his enemies to stomach. Speaking of public image, our next icon was a master at shaping her own narrative, but she did it to secure her own power. And it's a story of pure political genius. Of course, I'm talking about the one and only Queen of the Nile, Cleopatra. And her real story isn't just about beauty and drama, it's about a secret that most people have no idea about. Okay, get ready for this, because this is the big one. The most famous pharaoh in all of Egyptian history was not ethnically Egyptian at all. I mean, to really let that sink in, her family, the Ptolemaic dynasty, had been ruling Egypt for almost 300 years before she ever took the throne. They were Macedonian Greeks, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. For generations, they ruled as total outsiders. But this is what separates Cleopatra from the rest of her family. This is what made her a political genius. See, unlike all her ancestors who couldn't even be bothered to learn the local language, she went all in. She learned to speak Egyptian, she embraced their religion, and she presented herself as a true, honest-to-God pharaoh. And this was way more than just for show. It was a brilliant move that earned her the fierce loyalty of her people. She chose to be one of them. So, while Cleopatra strategically chose to lead, our next icon was faced with a totally different kind of choice about leadership, and it's a story of incredible humility. We're talking about the face of modern genius himself, Albert Einstein. We all know E equals MC squared, but there's a part of his life story that is just mind-blowing. Okay, picture this. The year is 1952. The newly formed state of Israel has just lost its first president, and they're searching for a new leader, someone with real global prestige. And they decide to reach out to one of the most respected human beings on the planet. And they ask him if he'll be their next president. Seriously. They offered Albert Einstein the presidency of Israel. Could you even imagine that? A physicist leading a nation? The offer was on the table, and the entire world was basically waiting to see what he would do. And his answer? He said no. And his reason why is just a masterclass in self-awareness. He basically said, look, I lack the natural aptitude and the experience to deal properly with people. He knew his genius was for physics, for the abstract world of ideas, not for politics. It's an amazing reminder that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is admit what you're not good at. Okay, let's move on to our next icon, Mahatma Gandhi. Now, long before he became a global symbol of peace and independence, he was just a young lawyer working in South Africa. And it was one single, deeply humiliating event there that forged the philosophy of resilience that would literally change the course of history. Let me just walk you through what happened. Gandhi, as a lawyer, buys a first-class train ticket. He gets on the train, but a white passenger complains about him being in the first-class carriage. He's then ordered to move to third class. He refuses because he has a valid ticket and he's standing on principle. And for that, he is forcibly, physically thrown off the train into the freezing cold night. That moment of absolute degradation, that was the turning point. Because it was right after that, shivering in the dark, that the seeds of his world-changing idea began to sprout. He called it satyagraha, which means truth force. He had this profound realization that you don't fight injustice and hate with more violence and hate. You fight it with unwavering dignity and nonviolent resistance. And the power of that one idea, it was just immense. I mean, that one horrible night on a train didn't just light the spark for India's independence. It created this global ripple effect that inspired people like Martin Luther King Jr. in the American Civil Rights Movement and Nelson Mandela in the fight against apartheid. All from one man's resilience. All right, for our final icon, we're diving into the mind of the ultimate Renaissance man, Leonardo da Vinci. We know him for the Mona Lisa, of course, but the most bizarre quirk of his genius reveals a mind that just worked on a completely different plane of existence than the rest of us. Just look at this for a second. It's totally confusing, right? It almost looks like gibberish. That's because it's written completely backwards. This is mirror writing. To read Leonardo da Vinci's private journals and his craziest ideas, you literally have to hold them up to a mirror. So the big question is, why? Why did he write like this? And the truth is, nobody knows for sure. There are a few theories. Maybe he was trying to keep his revolutionary ideas secret from the church or his rivals. A more practical theory is that, since he was left-handed, writing from right to left kept him from smudging the ink. Or maybe, and this is the one I kind of like, maybe his brain was just wired so differently that this was the most natural way for him to think. And the ideas he was jotting down in that backwards script, they were literally visions of the future. I'm talking about detailed designs for flying machines, submarines, parachutes, things that were centuries ahead of his time. It's incredible. His backward writing was hiding some of the most forward-thinking in human history. So when we pull it all together, what have we really learned? We've seen how a story about Napoleon's height was really about propaganda, how Cleopatra's secret was all about choosing her identity. We saw Einstein's profound humility, Gandhi's incredible resilience, and Da Vinci's unbelievable originality. These hidden truths, they don't diminish these icons. They make them human. They make them even more incredible. And I think all these stories are just a great reminder that the history we learn in school, it's never the full picture. There's always more to the story. Which kind of leaves us with one last question to chew on. If even these giants of history had such surprising secrets, what other historical truths should we start questioning next?